In today's episode, let's talk about maintenance and what I do to my rig when I am done on my adventures. So stay tuned, guys. Welcome back to the garage, everybody, and as you can see, I can walk! It's awesome! I have been enjoying being able to get back on my feet. This is week 3 of being able to walk around and do things, and that is what I have been doing. I have actually been working on my rig right here non-stop for the past week or so, and what I've been working on is the suspension. I have got all my components and everything. As you guys can see right behind me, I've got the box with my new Falcon shocks in them, which I will reveal to you guys in a completely different video. But for today's video, I wanted to talk about maintenance and what I do to my rig after I am done on the trail. Now, I am going to break this into 2 different categories, and the reason is because I do 2 different things when it comes to maintenance. And like always, I'm in the garage, doors open, noise, I apologize. Can't do anything about it, oh well. Alright, but I'm breaking it into 2 categories for this reason. Because I do things at a certain mileage, and then I have a different checklist that I do after every single adventure I go on. So to begin, let's start with what I do when I hit a certain amount of mileage. Okay, so some of the things that I do at a certain mileage. So when the Jeep, every 5,000 miles with the Jeep, I do these things. And the reason is because I've hit that mileage mark. And those things consist of changing the oil. Now, I change the oil every 5,000 miles, not 10,000, every 5,000. Because when I am off on my adventures, when I am wheeling, it's very stressful on the Jeep. It puts a lot of strain on the motor. And because I'm also filming, it sits in idle for a lot of the time as well. Which means the oil is getting circulated through the engine more, meaning that it is getting used more. And since that happens, I change it every 5,000 miles to ensure that, 1, there's no issues with the Jeep, because if there are any issues within the motor that I can't hear, I will see it when I drain out the oil or when I check the oil filter. I'll be able to see the metal and things like that if something was wrong. Also, it'll tell me the state of what my motor's in. Now, my motor doesn't have, it's got less than 40,000 miles on it, guys, because I lived on an island for 5 years. But checking the oil color allows me to know. If it is super dark, I know that the engine is burning that oil a lot faster than it should, and it is getting really dirty. And if it's coming out clear, it tells me that it's doing just fine. But I change it every 5,000 miles. Now, yes, I know with more modern cars, you can change it about every 10,000 miles, synthetic oil, everything. That's all I run in the Jeep is synthetic fluid. But with how much I wheel, how long it sits idling when I'm running up and down the trail for the camera, I change it every 5,000 miles just to keep it happy. The other thing that I check every about 4 to 5,000 miles, unless my adventure was somewhere really, really dusty, is the air filter. I will change it out regardless of its state. Every about 5,000 miles, I change out the air filter. Now, I will change it out, like I said, if I went on an adventure, it was really dusty, and it got bad, I will change it out then. And then I probably won't touch it again until I hit that 5,000 mile mark. I'll look at it, and then I'll let it go. But for the most part, about every 5,000 miles, I change out the air filter, just because if I am on the trails a lot, I am sucking in a lot of dust, especially if I am following behind somebody or there's a ton of people out on the trails. This summer here in Colorado, I had to change this a couple times because it got really bad. Now, one day I'd love to upgrade this so I can just have one that I can blow out and just reuse, but for now, that is what I do. So one of the other things that I do check every about 5,000 miles or so is the winch itself. Now, when I'm out on the trail, there's been a few times where I've had to recover myself, and many times where I've had to help recover other people. So I know in general the winch works great. But what I like to do is I like to check the winch line Now that doesn't mean I always pull it all the way out, because unless I've noticed something prior to, but every about 5,000 to 10,000 miles, I will undo a good half of the winch line just to inspect the winch line itself. Because while I'm using it, though if I don't see anything right out the bat, most of the time when I am trying to recover somebody or myself, I'm not really paying attention to the winch line and what it looks like unless it immediately is standing out to me. So as I've used it more and things like that, I like to pull it out, inspect the line, make sure that it is good, and then respin it so that it kind of sits nice and evenly within its housing itself. Because sometimes when you're recovering yourself or other people, depending on the angle you're at, the winch doesn't exactly spool up nicely. And though you try to get it as nice as you can afterwards, it doesn't always work that way. But I like to generally inspect this, make sure everything's working correctly, the knobs turn so I can put it in free spool, activate it, make sure the wireless is working. I just like to check it about every 5,000 miles to ensure that everything is in its working order. Because the last thing I need is for something to have gone wrong on my previous recovery, or I didn't put it away correctly, or something is going to happen and then when I need it, it's not going to work. And then you all may notice my lovely new license plate cover. Yes, I have new license plates. No longer do I have my Hawaii plates. But because the state of Colorado requires 2 plates, I have this really cool bracket that sits right behind the fairing for the winch. So it sits there and I can just flip it up and do that. Fun little additive that I've done. Now another thing I do every 5,000 miles or after a very, very long adventure, which normally puts me at about the 5,000 mile mark, is I rotate and balance my tires. I take it over to Discount Tire, that's the shop I use. They're not a sponsor of my channel, but I take it over there. I have them do the 5 tire rotation with the Jeep, so all the tires are getting rotated. I ensure that they're balanced and that, they do a full inspection of my tires to make sure that they're wearing properly and that there's no issues that are happening with it. Because generally if they're losing air, there's a hole, but they go through and ensure that they are all working properly. And so far, guys, I've been loving these Milestar Patagonia MTO2 tires. They have been working amazing and great on the road. Now, one thing that I do after every 5,000, one of the things I check for after every adventure and every 5,000 miles is the steering alignment. Now, I have knocked the steering out of alignment several times on my adventures. And so I just generally check the steering alignment. Now, you'll know if it's out of alignment because if the steering wheel's cockeyed and you're driving straight down the road, but I generally check for it because I have been known for knocking it out of alignment. And some of the things I've noticed are Jeeps don't generally stay aligned very well, especially if you're hitting some more difficult trails or you've slipped off a rock and jarred it or something like that. It does kind of go out of alignment. It's not hard to do yourself if you have the proper tools, or you can take it into a shop, but that is something else that I generally look for. And if you guys haven't guessed what I was just doing, that is the other thing I do every 5,000 miles is I do check the auxiliary lighting and systems that I have on the Jeep. Because I'm not always doing a night run or getting into camp really late where the sun's going down, I do like to check that the rock lights, the front lights, things like that I have throughout the Jeep, the radio, things that I have wired up to an auxiliary switch system are working and functioning properly. And the reason why is ever since I went out to Moab the first time during Easter Jeep Safari at the beginning of this year, I noticed that 3 of my rock lights weren't working. And it ended up being that they had gotten damaged and the little LEDs had actually exploded within the light itself. So, and I hadn't been checking it, and they had been on the Jeep for just over a year, never checked them. Well, ever since then, I ensure that they are working properly, completely functional, and that all of them are working because I'm not always using them. Unfortunately, when I've gone wheeling with other people, they don't have radio systems for the most part, and most of the time I'm wheeling by myself, so I'm not really using my GMRS radio, or I'm not really using the front lights or the rock lights unless I'm getting into camp in the evening time. So I like to ensure that they're still functioning properly, because it does snow here, it does rain here, wires get wet or dusty. I just want to make sure connections are great, or that they haven't gotten damaged from being on the trail, because I have hit branches, things like that, or the rock lights are tucked up far enough I'm not worried about them, but they do go through puddles and washes, and I just want to ensure that they are still functioning properly. But that is everything I do at about 5,000 miles or so. Now, let's get into what I do after every single adventure. So one of the first things I do after I come home from any adventure is I wash the Jeep. I clean the outside, underneath, and inside the Jeep. For two reasons. One, I like it when my Jeep is clean. I'm not one of those people where I like leaving all the mud and dirt and things on it to kind of prove that I was off. I know I go off-road, I film it, I run up and down the trail enough, I don't need to prove it to anybody that it goes off-road. I know it does. So I clean it. The other reason that I clean it is it shows me any damage or issues that are going wrong. For instance, if I somehow got some kind of body damage that I didn't know about, or I didn't notice it at first, I find it when I'm washing the Jeep. If something is going wrong underneath, or if there's a spot that has rust starting, I notice it. Or paint's flicked off, I notice it because I washed the Jeep. I clean the inside to ensure that it's just clean. I like being in a clean environment when I'm driving and it gets really dirty. I like to clean it to make sure that it's clean and that dust isn't getting absolutely everywhere. Now, I clean the underside of the Jeep for all those reasons I just said, but also to check any kind of damage or scrape marks, and to make sure that critical components are not damaged and are still working. As you guys know, when I'm in Moab, I push the Jeep pretty hard. Okay, hard within its limitations that I'm comfortable with, but I am known for dropping the Jeep on its belly, scraping things as I'm going over them, things like that. It happens to everybody, and I don't have full armor going under the Jeep. I just have the typical Rubicon armor that the Jeep came with. But I like to ensure that, one, it's still in decent shape. I know it's meant to take a hit, but I just want to make sure it's doing its job and nothing broke off or came loose. And I also like to ensure that a lot of those little critical components and wires and plugs and things like that did not get damaged by anything. Because if one of those go damaged, you guys know, modern day vehicles, everything is controlled by a computer, and as soon as something goes wrong, the computer goes haywire. Well, this is no different, though it's got little less of some of the safety features, thank goodness. It still loses its marbles when things don't work correctly. So I like to ensure that those are taken care of, and by getting up under there, that allows me. The other thing I do after every adventure is when I'm under there, I do check a lot of the exposed nuts and bolts and things like that to ensure that they're still tight, that they haven't moved. I've got them all marked from when I tightened them all before we even started wheeling to make sure they were all tight and good. And I like to check that those little marks that I made on them haven't moved, gotten out of alignment, things like that, because there have been a couple that have come loose. Over the course of an adventure, when I got home, they had moved, and so I ended up retightening them or taking them off, Loctiting them, and putting them back. But it is a good habit to get into. So one of the checks that I do all the time after every single adventure, before or when I return, so that I know it is ready for my next one, is I check all the fluids. I check the oil level, the power steering, the coolant level, the brake fluid. I check it all just to ensure that it is topped off, there is no leaks, anything of that nature, so that I know the Jeep is prepared and can be its best on the trail. Because like I said, it allows me to check for leaks. If all of a sudden I'm burning through a bunch of fluid really badly, somewhere along, somewhere in the hoses, somewhere along its entire layout, there is a leak somewhere. And by checking it all, it allows me to ensure that everything is working properly. The other thing, like I said before, is I do check the air filter if it was a really dusty trail. And two, I just kind of check the general overall dirtiness of the engine bay itself. Right now it's a little dusty. It's kind of been sitting for 2 months why I couldn't go out driving it very much. But I checked the general dust level within the engine bay, because if it gets too dusty, I'm a bit of a clean freak, but when it gets too dusty, you don't really know if something's going to go wrong, or if it did go wrong, you don't exactly know where because of all the dirt and dust within the engine bay. So I do, for the most part, try and keep the engine bay as clean as I can. And finally, what I check after every adventure is my equipment. Whether it is my recovery equipment or my equipment that I use when I'm at camp, my kitchen equipment, sleeping equipment, things like that, or it's just my typical equipment that I take, camera gear, stuff like that. I check it all after every adventure. Now, it doesn't always get used on every adventure. My recovery gear, unless I'm in a recovery mode, don't really touch it. But I do use, after every adventure, is my airing system. I do check the hoses, I do clean the hoses, I ensure that the air system is working correctly within the Jeep, because I want to be able to air up after an adventure. If something goes wrong, have the ability to have the air working correctly. I check, if I use my recovery gear, I really check out my recovery gear. Besides the winch and looking at it, I look at my recovery ropes, my shackles, things like that. If I used them, I check them. And I also like to check them just to make sure that it's all still there and I didn't misplace anything, because I have done that a couple times and I've always wondered where it went. And normally it was because I put it somewhere it wasn't normally at. But I like to check my equipment to make sure it works, and especially my camping equipment, because it gets used a lot when I get to camp and I put it away. Having my new kitchen set up in the back of the Jeep has helped tremendously with keeping it organized and safe and operational. But before, I used to pull out totes, guys, and go in and out of the totes all the time, and gear would get moved around as I put the tote in, and it was just kind of a mess. But I learned to check my equipment to make sure it worked, because if things broke, I knew ahead of time, or I knew before my next adventure. Like after our last adventure that I did in Moab, after spending a week out there, my old camp stove, which was over 15 years old, broke. It finally had enough after my last day at camp, and I thought, oh, maybe it'd be able to survive. Got home, looked at it, it really wasn't good anymore. So little things like that you just don't really think about, I check them just to ensure that they are going to work. Well, guys, that is what I do for my maintenance with my vehicle after my adventures and at every 5,000 miles. It's not a huge checklist, but it does work for me, and it ensures that when I am out there on the trail on my adventures having an absolutely fun time, that I am not worried about the Jeep giving me any kind of issue. And if it does, it's very easy to figure out what is going wrong with it. But thank you all for joining me. If you guys haven't checked out my other social media accounts, the links are in the description below. If you have been watching the channel for a while, I know I've been a little bit quiet on my social media front. Guys, what can I say? I was in recovery, couldn't do a whole lot, and I don't like, what am I going to post? The same things that I've been posting? I haven't been out on the trail. But all sorts of new things are happening as we speak. The next time you see this Jeep, she's going to be a lot taller than she is right now, because at the moment, you guys don't see it, but my garage is a mess. I have got suspension components all over my garage, and I am working at getting her all done, because like I said, I'm doing it here in the garage, and I have actually been filming it and bringing you guys along on that adventure, which you guys will see later on once I get it all done. But thank you all for joining me again. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, guys. My goal of hitting 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year, we've only got about 2 months left, and we are really close, really close. And you know, you guys are what makes that happen. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button, guys. And thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.